It's Tuesday, it's buddy time. This week's special guest host, Dee Alley. We're going to be talking about comic book planning.
Hello, everybody. I'm here for Comic Book School. Got my Comic Book School shirt on, and we're here to talk about planning your comic book. Since it's January and we don't have too many irons in the fire after a nice long holiday, we just wanted to talk about what steps you can take to better plan out your 2022. And for those of you who are new to Comic Book School, kind of the threads that we follow to get our projects off the ground. We have our special favorite temporary co-host, Mike Fasola, here. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. Still here, temporary.
You've kind of been temporary for a while now. When are we going to get you on the books here?
I don't know. I think I always just want to stay with that temporary, moniker. So you never know. I can just jump in and out anytime I want.
Fair enough. And also joining us tonight is one of our favorite friends of Comic Book School. He's been on the show a couple times before as a Marvel editor, indie editor, and a great friend of Buddy Scalera and ours, Darren Sanchez.
How you doing, guys?
Hey, Darren.
Hey, hi, Darren.
Good to
and
be
then,
here.
of course, in the background, we have our voice of reason, who's running the controls today. If you leave comments, he will help us out, Mr. Rob Andersin.
Wait, you left me in control of something? Oh, damn.
And then he'll mute. Okay,
Voice of
well,
reason,
he is our voice of reason in the background somewhere. He'll pop in when he needs to. So we wanted to talk about planning today, and I actually did a little bit of research on this because I am a very big planner. I love to go in with a plan. I've been a project manager for years in a couple different creative industries, and I know that a lot of people think that they understand all the bits and bobbles that go into creating a comic book, but I think there's a lot of things that we maybe don't discuss. And I was looking it up online. I did a bunch of research over the weekend and today, and most of the how to plan a comic or how to start a comic information that you get starts at have an idea and begin to script. And I think there's a whole pre-production step that a lot of those sites are missing that I kind of wanted to discuss with you guys. So the first question that I had for both of you, actually, because you're both in creative industries, is why is planning out your creative project, your comic book, whatever it is, important?
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was never a big planner. I would just like to jump right in and, go, okay, I got the idea. Let's just, see what we get. And usually those projects ended up being, a quarter written or half written or just stopped after a page and a half or two. And that's why I learned that you have to sit down, go from start to finish, figure out, you don't have to figure out every little minute detail, but you have to know the whole basic story to get things going. And then you just have a nice outline to follow instead of just going, oh, maybe I'll do this or maybe I'll do that. So planning is still key.
Cool. Darren?
The way I see it, there's a couple of different ways I've done it. One is a publishing plan where you know for sure that you're putting out, say 14 books this month or 14 books in the next 3 months, something like that. Then you definitely need to have a schedule because it's real. If you're just, I don't mean to say just and belittle it, but if you're just brainstorming and you really want to do a project and you're starting and you got 3 different projects half written or half done on your computer, you probably don't need a schedule just yet because you don't have an intention, you don't have a deadline. Like if you want to get a book done and you want to hit it for San Diego or Chicago or New York Comic Con, and there's a real deadline, you need to have a plan or it's never going to come together in time. And in production, that's what I've done for a long time to help keep comic books, trains running on time in magazines and hardcovers and all kinds of stuff. But without a plan, it's never you can't just be vague and say, yeah, I'm going to put it out at the beginning of the first quarter. And, I'm not sure who's going to draw it yet. I'll figure that out. That doesn't work. If you're serious, you really need a plan and a schedule and an editor, or if you're not going to be the editor yourself.
Okay, cool. One of the things that I did want to ask about, especially because of so many people don't really understand what planning is. Sorry, Rob, did you say something?
Yeah, you wanted me to chime in with the indie stuff.
Yeah, I do.
So just from an indie, because I've done this from an independent creator point of view without the structure. Here's a little bit of a tip. Both of them are very right, but one thing that a lot of people don't realize is the writer is often everything to the project and brings on the artist. A lot of times the writer themselves are kind of caught in a rock and a hard place until they know the artist is going to live up to everything they said they can do. There is a position where you start with test prints with the artist, and then you see if they could do one or two sequential pages. Until that point, you generally haven't really committed to a lot other than your own story. And from that point, when you have the artist in place and you can get the schedule from them, because a lot of independent artists aren't doing this full time, you're at the mercy of their schedule, and you have to come to agreements. So a lot of the indie stuff that gets held back or kind of messed up is often due to an artist bailing on a project, and or having to step away for family reasons. It happens, real life happens, something at work happens. So I think a lot with independent creators, they don't make a plan until the artist is in place, and then they start to build around that, unless the artist themselves is, of course, the person who is the creator. And at that point, I hear it's a lot easier, because writers generally don't disappear. They actually stay with it and stay involved. I'm not saying never, but it generally doesn't happen. It doesn't mean writers aren't replaced for difference of opinions, mind you. I have heard that. But generally speaking, it all determined comic book wise, especially independent, on that artist, because everything is built around them.
Cool. Some of the things that I wanted to mention is specifically about why we plan, things that I learned 6 times, 7 times over doing 2 anthologies with Comic Book School in the past 2 years is the reason that I plan specifically is so that I know where I'm going. A lot of people go into creative projects either from a writing standpoint, an artist standpoint, or even as an editor, and they think, okay, we're going to have a comic book, and they don't really define what that means. Are you going to have an 8-page comic, an anthology, a printed book? Are you going to have a digital out piece? Are you going to have, like Darren said, are you going to have 14 issues in the next year? Or are you going to do a single page comic on a webtoons type of platform? So those are the types of things that I think a lot of people need to think about, so that they can clearly communicate not only to who they're going to work with, if they're working in a publishing company or as an independent. If you have a team, you guys all need to be on the same page. You shouldn't be hiring an artist to do a comic book and they don't know how many pages you're going to do or where it's going to end up. And then on top of that, even if you're doing it for yourself, it's easier to tell people what you're doing and get people interested in your project for all of the eventual buyers of your product if you know what you're selling. So one of the things that I think is a big key to planning is knowing what it is you're trying to do. Like really writing down just a bullet point. We are making a monthly webtoon. We are making a 8-page printed comic. We are making an anthology, or we're making a comic book to submit to a publisher. I mean, even that has a connotation of getting everybody on the same page. So the other thing that I do with plans is that I make a plan so that the next time I do a project, I can see where I went wrong. It leaves a level of accountability, especially from an editorial or team lead sort of view. I'm sure, Darren, you have had, probably every problem that could ever happen on a comic book. You've probably experienced it at some point. And going into the next project, like thinking about how you would improve so that that problem doesn't happen again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even going back in technology ways, we used to have to deliver hand-colored pages to be scanned drum scanned by a company. And we would send one of our guys on the Long Island Railroad to go out to Long Island and have these things scanned. This was back in the early 90s when I worked at Valiant. And one of our guys, a guy named Charles Lister, and I still give him shit for this to this day, he got off the train and he left all the colored pages on the train. And he went to the place and he was empty-handed. And he realized after he got there that he left all the original art on the train. So he called, and I, after a few minutes of being pissed off, I had to call the entire, at the time I was lucky because it was like the old school Marvel bullpen. We had like 5-6 colorists who worked there. They colored with Doc Martens watercolors, and we basically pulled an all-nighter and had book was colored by Manny Hands. That's who we credited. And it basically every single colorist in the company did like 3 pages, and then we sent them with a different person the next day to get scanned. So it was I don't remember what issue that was, but I wish I did, because I could pull it out and you could see the different styles like every 3 pages.
Yeah.
But that we've had all kinds of crazy stuff come up, and replacing artists and replacing writers, or you know, they you know, a book's getting canceled, so we have to I don't there's basically, we took all the talent and put them on different stuff, and so we had to recruit a whole new team for like the last issue, that kind of stuff. There's a lot that happens when you're doing monthly books, but indie books, there's a lot of different things that go on with indie books as well. Personally, I started off helping young artists basically find a way to get their first published stuff by agreeing to draw my book, and then I would put an ad in Wizard, and I would pay for them to have a table at a show somewhere. You know, I'd promote them as much as I could. And if we sold the movie rights, we owned it 50-50, you know, those kinds of things. That's what you have to do. You have to almost barter in the beginning to get an artist. But I think that once you're at a certain level, asking for artists to work for free is not cool. And so you're almost guaranteed to have the guy flake out after about 5 pages, because man, it's hard drawing a comic book, and it's harder than people realize. Even if you can draw, you might not be good at storytelling. Also, it's incrementally harder to do a first issue of a brand new IP than it is to do like an issue of Spider-Man, where everybody knows what everything looks like, and you know all his powers, you know all that stuff. If you're creating a brand new character, your artist is creating whatever you write, and he shoots rays out of his hands. He's creating the look for that, you know.
Yeah.
He's creating the look for everything. If he has friends at school, he's got a new girlfriend, the artist has to create everything. So it's harder when you're doing the first issue. If you're creating your own indie, there's so much more that goes into it than just writing a pre-existing IP, and that takes time. You have to plan for that. You have to plan for character designs. You have to plan for a little bit more time writing. Just in general, a little more time for everything.
Well, that actually brings me right into my second point. That's a perfect segue. What are the things you think is most important to plan for? So for me, coming from, you know, websites and apps and from the advertising world, it's all about like specs. Where's it going? Who's paying for it, and who's responsible for what? Those are the big key things for me, because I would always get to the end of a project and people go, great, we have this, you know, video or this website or whatever. Okay, I need it to be in this size. And it's like, no. You should have told me that 3 months ago. It's
Right.
already a size. It's
Right.
going to take a whole nother workload to make it whatever new size you've come up with. Why didn't you tell us this up front? So I was wondering, for you guys, what are like the key things that you say, this is definitely something I need to plan for? Obviously, timeline we talked about, and then, you know, people on your team or eventuality, that kind of stuff. Like what are the things that you think, when I'm making a plan, what do I need to plan for?
Well, just from a writing standpoint of just, you know, sketches or a book or whatever, it's knowing, you know, point A to point B, you know, from the beginning to the end, because you can come up with, you know, the greatest group of characters that you want to put in your book or whatever. And then if you're like, well, I don't know what to do with them. Oh, they're going to fight a bad guy, but you know, you don't know what the bad guy's motivations are. You don't know the world. You don't know anything about it. It doesn't do anything, because you can write a great first chapter and then it all falls apart if you don't know where they're going, how they're going to evolve, and what, you know, what the big battle is going to be, and the big finale.
That totally agree. That's why I think it's harder to create than it is to write a existing character, for sure. But in planning, there's certain things that are standard that you like you said, format. Okay, the trim size. There's so many things that are standard in comic book production that after a while you don't even ask certain things. You assume that it's standard comic book size, 6 5/8 by 10 3/16, or if you need to know the the computer dimensions and decimals, I can give you that too. But it's the resolution, 300 DPI, whether it's RGB or CMYK, depends on if you're printing it or if it's digital. There's all kinds of different specs. The page count, though, is very standard. If you have a story, pretty much every story at Marvel is around the same number of pages, like 24, give or take a couple of pages, depending on how many ads they sold, or if they have something else they want to tease in the back of the book because they have 32-page book. So there's certain things that are standard. So as a writer, you generally assume that it's between 20 and 24 pages, unless the editor tells you, hey, I have an 11-page story I need you to write. Then okay, it's a little bit different. You got to think about things differently. They can't be as complicated, so it's really, you got to know the format. That's the first thing. And if you're working with other people, make sure they all understand the resolution, what size to draw things at if they're drawing digitally. You don't want to get something that's 72 DPI and so tiny you can't even use it.
We had big problems on the anthology with people understanding the live area.
Yeah.
They would have a page that was the right spec, the right format. I got a lot of, every different type of file type.
Yeah, they don't know.
But, once you got it, it would go all the way to the edge. I'm like, there's a trim and a bleed for this to be cut. Like you can't just run on to,
it's
some
okay
other
to run on, but you're going to trim it.
Exactly.
Just don't put anything important near the edges. So,
but it's a rule that I think a lot of our newbies didn't know. And I didn't know until I cut it into the book and thought, nobody's going to be able to read that.
Right. Yeah. I've resized many pages, many panels, even in lettering, there's, if there's a heavy-handed writer who's got a lot of dialogue and you've got a full panel of art, we've had to take art and kind of shift it down or scale it and just draw a little bit of extra, kind of skyline or something to put the balloons, have room for the balloons. Because new artists, they always forget to leave enough room for the balloons. That you're writing, you're in your mind when you write, you're thinking left to right. And a lot of times the artist is just looking for the coolest thing, the coolest angle, and there's nowhere to put the balloons without covering somebody's fist or chest or face. Yeah. Or the top of their head, it's just weird. So there's a lot of things that artists learn as they go. The more issues they do, the more that they'll learn. But I try to have them send thumbnails so I could take a quick look at their storytelling and make some suggestions so that we don't have to deal with that too much. But sometimes, you don't get a chance to look at the thumbnails and you end up having to do edits after the fact.
Right.
All right, Dee, I got some stuff for you here.
Okay, go ahead, Rob, because I got some stuff to add, but I want to hear from you too.
Okay, first off, as a writer, you have to, because Darren had said this, and I wanted to comment before we switched to this, so I just follow up.
Sorry.
Writer, reference photos. You have to send reference photos to help the artist see what you do. Don't tell the artist, well, I think it's a blonde girl, and you have the ideal idea of what the blonde girl looks like, then set the artist up for failure and be like, oh, that's nothing at all what I wanted, by just describing it as a blonde girl. When you do that to your artist, the artist now thinks, okay, she has to be blonde. Let me draw her any way I want to. If you have something in your mind, you have to write it out. You can use photos, grab images of people, set the mood, all right? Make sure the artist knows what you're talking about. Have open lines of communication and ask what the artist's limits are. And if they tell you they don't have limits, consider that a red flag.
Consider that a limit.
Every artist can tell you exactly what they're horrible at. They'll tell you where they struggle artistically. They know it. They'll tell you right away. So if you're doing a book with farm animals and they say, I have no problem with anything, and they've never drawn a farm animal, they might learn during your project that their kryptonite is farm animals. So make sure that you really go over the book with them and know that. And this one, really, guys, you have to listen to. Like Darren says, no one wants to work for free, right? But be wary of the artist who offers you a discounted rate. Sure, they're going to do you a favor and do your pages for $40, but I guarantee you that $40 page is not going to be the best page they've ever made. It won't even be close. You're getting the Jack Kirby rate. What do I mean by that? That's not a dig on Jack Kirby, and this is something that always bothers me about Jack Kirby when people say Jack Kirby style. Jack Kirby's style in Marvel originally was quick as he could get it out. literally as fast as he could draw it, so he could draw 5 other issues in that same month. That's what Marvel wanted. They wanted him to be a machine. So when people go back and do that Jack Kirby style and takes them 6 months to do what he did in 5 to 6 days, they don't realize that that's not really Jack Kirby. If you gave Jack Kirby time, it's what he put out in DC, which was beautiful and artistic. Always remember that Jack Kirby's original art was because he was doing it as fast as he could, because he was the only artist at Marvel, it seemed, for the first 5 or 6 years Marvel really came to be. So when you have that much on your plate, that's the Jack Kirby special. When you get the real Jack Kirby, you have something of beauty that we all aspire to actually have in our comics. So those are my things. Dee, what do you got?
Okay. So keep in mind, I'm coming at this from a project manager, editor type of view, right? A lot of the things that I was thinking of for planning were things that I think normally we don't think about. So especially for indies, especially if you're doing this for the first time, think about the financial investment. Whether you like it or not, publishers already have money. They're paying people to be there. People are getting a paycheck. So you don't have to think about where the markers are coming from, who's paying for the web hosting service, and what it's going to take to get everybody on the same form of communication, whether that's a chat or an email or a forum or a social media platform. All of those things take communication and money. And I think a lot of writers find it very easy to just jump on any, computer program, or even just grab a pen and a notebook and write out whatever they need. Artists have paints, inks, Bristol board. I mean, everything is going to cost a little bit more than just your standard, web processor or word processor. So there's an investment there. And that's, I think, another one of the reasons that I think a lot of artists are less willing to work for free quicker.
Sure.
Because they have to invest so much.
Even if they're completely digital and there's no art supplies at all,
software costs money.
They're putting in 5 times the amount of time. Unless you're an extremely slow writer, the penciler is going to take a lot longer and spend a lot more time with this story than you are as a writer.
Right.
So I think, aside from supplies, you should respect the time that they're putting into it. And I think if you're giving them a fair pay rate, you can expect the pages on time. And in order for you to know what on time is, you have to make a schedule. Otherwise, you have no idea if you're going to hit the deadline or not. So another segue.
Exactly. My second thing is timeline. So understanding the financial investment, though, a lot of people, especially people new to making comics, I think they have an idea that it's going to cost money, and a lot of people think, I'll just make it when I sell the book, or my Kickstarter will take care of that. And I want to kind of dissuade people from thinking that they can go into this with no idea of what things cost. In order to sell your comic, in order to, even if you give it away for free on one of the services, digitally, Webtoons, on a website, whatever, there's a cost for hosting. There's a cost for investing in it. And even if you're not paying that up front, you need to know what it is. Because if it comes time, like Rob often tells me at the end of a Kickstarter, when people have everything fulfilled and then they go to send out those comic books and they have no money for shipping, that comes out of your pocket. That comes out of the pocket of your profits. And it comes out of the pocket of the people who have contributed to it. So if somebody else asks you to work on things, make sure they know what the costs are going in. Even if you're not covering them up front, you should know what they are. And then, of course, the timeline. If you're going to pay an artist to do a 20-page book and they say, I can do 4 pages in a week, you need to make sure that they're getting them in on time, because if you're going to hit a deadline, you need to hit it. But also because comics are a team sport, so to speak, your inker is waiting on your penciled pages. Your colorist is waiting on your inked pages. Your letterer is waiting on, everybody can't start until they've got something from the last guy. So you need to make sure that if you have all hands on deck, everybody's working and they're not just idly wasting your time and money, or their time and money. If you're doing it yourself, that's just as important, because you need to know it's going to take you this long to write it. It's going to take you this long to draw it. It's going to take you this long to color it. Getting to that publishing point and getting your expectations set is going to feed into a marketing plan, how you sell it, who you publish it with. All of those things are based on the timeline of how long it's going to take you to get it done. So you need to know that, and that should be part of your planning. The other thing that I think a lot of people need to know is communication. So everybody thinks that they're the greatest communicator of all time. If I say something, surely you're going to understand it. But there's a lot of lingo. People have lingo in different industries. Comic books have lingo just as much as anyone else. I was actually talking to Darren about schedules the other day, and he was talking about submitting to Diamond. And I have no idea how that works. I've never done it. He mentioned it like it was just this assumed thing. And I thought, I'm going to need to research that because I have no idea what that takes or what that timeline is. So if I ever have to get to a point where I want to sell in stores, I don't know anything about that. So that's a thing. Some people are really great on Kickstarter. They know those timelines. They know kind of what they need to have ready when. Don't assume your team knows things, especially in newbie groups, especially in indie comics. Right. Specs to me mean one thing than to another person. I told one person that I needed their pages according to this template. I sent them the template. They sent it to me. They sent it to me in RGB instead of CMYK. They sent it to me with the pages all the way to the edge of the bleed because they didn't know what trimmer bleed was. And they sent it to me as pings when I asked them for high-res TIFFs. When I told them that I needed high-res TIFFs, they said, I don't know what that means. So we took a little trip to Google, and I explained what it was to export the files. So it's always good to have clear and open lines of communication, especially in these trying times. If you don't respond to emails,
Uh-oh.
I think Dee just froze.
Yeah. That's what happens when you don't respond to emails. Everything just shuts down.
This is how it feels when you're responding to an email right now.
I thought she was pausing for effect.
She is totally teaching us a lesson. She is now not responding. I'm hoping we get her back in a second. While we wait for her to reconnect, just one of the things I want to talk about was building a better mousetrap. What do I mean by that? When you have contracts are what she was talking about. Clear lines of communication. You write out a contract, people understand things. In those contracts, add both penalties and rewards. What are penalties? Being late. If they are late constantly and they miss the deadline, they get a certain amount of the money not taken. You hold something across, like you get the page rate, but you hold back $5, $10 on every page. And at the very end, they get it if they get it, D's back. So when they get the money at the end, they actually get everything they were supposed to for being on time. Now, if you're going to put penalties, make sure you put rewards. Add an incentive. If they hit every deadline right, give them an extra $50, $100. That's motivation to keep your team on point. So, Dee, you proved your point. You made it a long time for the email response.
Yeah. Communication is key. Also, charging your laptop battery.
Yeah, and then one final thing, and I'll let Dee take back over. A writer who is a producer but shouldn't be their own editor. Do not make that mistake. Bring your editor in really quickly to be part of the project from the beginning. Have them read that first script. You don't want to find out you have a giant plot hole because the art's not right, because you wrote it wrong, and you find out about it after the artist has done it. No artist wants to hear, by the way, I screwed up, so you have to redraw this page. They're fine with they screwed up and they have to redraw a page. They don't want to hear you as a writer screwed up, because then they want you to pay them to redraw the page.
Well, and rightfully so. If you're going to ask them to redraw a page, you should not ask them unless you're willing to repay them for a new page. It's like adding page 25 to a 24-page story. So, like we said at the beginning, don't ask for free work, and that's the best way to guarantee that you'll get these things in on time.
Yep.
And as far as short paying people for being late, I generally won't do that. What I'll do is if you're late, I'll replace you, because I still got to get the book out. Just because you're late doesn't mean the book's not coming out. So I'll just let you know, we tried, I'm sorry, maybe we'll try again, depending on what happened. But I have to bring someone in to finish this book. And then I'll pay them for however many pages they did, and that'll be the end of it. If we end up not being able to use any of their stuff, there's a different rate called a kill fee that should be in a contract, that if they turn in work that's unusable, they'll get a kill fee. and it'll be, instead of $90 a page or $100 a page, it'll be like $25 a page. And that's because either the project got canceled, the client pulled out, you didn't make the Kickstarter, whatever the reason is, the project's canceled or the pages are unusable, you get a kill fee. And that's something else that you should consider putting into the contract.
Well, let me ask you, Darren, when do you pay them? Actually, I'm curious about that because with indie comics, we usually pay 2 pages at a time. That's generally the rule of thumb. You pay either a by page or 2 pages in advance. How do you actually pay the artists coming from a different level?
Well, I could tell you that Marvel, if the work is done, then they get paid on the next Tuesday or the next Wednesday. So there's a weekly pay. They expect to be paid weekly for whatever they turn in. On Monday, as an editor, you're trying to figure out how many pages came in for what, so that everybody can get paid. If somebody turns in something on Tuesday morning, they don't get paid for it until the next week. So everybody knows, turn in what you got on Monday, and that way you get paid quicker. As for indie stuff, it's not as uniform. When I got half the book or quarter of the book, when I have a batch of pages in, I'll ask them for an invoice, and then I'll send out a check. But it's not every week, because generally there's not that much going on every week unless you're right in the heat of things. You don't want to just be sending out payments for 1 page here. I prefer to pay in bigger batches than that. But if the guy needs the money, sometimes I'll pay them, depending if I've worked with them before. I might pay them for the whole book up front, knowing that they're good for it. But that's a risk in indie publishing. I understand. So.
Now going back to what you said about replacing your artist, Darren, do you always have like a backup, like someone ready to go, or is it just then you got to find somebody else?
Well, that's the beauty of experience, I think, because you have like a fat Rolodex, and that you have 4 or 5 guys who kind of draw in this style, more of a commercial, young, open lines, kind of a light style, like something you might use for, I don't know, Spider-Man Adventures, kind of a young feeling book. If you're doing something a little darker, you might have less options. And a lot of times the guy you want is busy, so you got to have as many options as you can. I try not to ever replace anybody, but sometimes something happens. Their wife got sick, or one guy broke his thumb or something, and he couldn't draw for a while. So we had to replace him. So you just have to be ready to replace them, and they understand. You just stress, we have to have the book out by a certain time. If you can't turn the pages in, what can I do to help you catch up? If you're not going to be able to catch up, then I can get you some help. If you just want off the project, then I'll have somebody else just take over. And you kind of talk it out that way.
So that brings me to my last 2 things about what to plan for, which specifically is contracts and credits. A lot of people go into comics, and I know that Rob has been bitten, I've been bitten, I'm sure everybody on this call. And you go in thinking we're all on the same team. This is what we're going to do. We're going to make this great story. And then it comes to the end of the line and somebody says, I deserve more, or I didn't get enough, or I'm not doing my part because of ego, whatever it may be. Right. So it's a very good idea, even if it's just an email or something. Basically, it's CYA, cover your ass. Make sure that if you're working with another person and there's money involved, you're all in agreement as to who gets what and who's responsible for what. If you're working by yourself, that's not as big of a deal, but it's a good idea to write it down just so that you know what you're going for, and you can refer back to it when you get to the end and say, I've accomplished this for myself. But if you're working with another person, any other person, and there's money involved, have a contract.
Absolutely.
I strongly.
Not just a contract, but there's something called a work for hire agreement,
right?
Which let's say I create a new story and I get an artist to draw it for me. If I've basically described the characters and kind of even sketched them out and provided him with the style guide on what I want this to look like, and he's drawing it, that'll be work for hire type work. It generally pays higher, but that's because it doesn't have any kind of percentage in the back end. Like if I happen to sell options for it, or if it turns into something like an ongoing or it becomes a TV show, whatever, that artist can't try to, well, I guess he could, but he won't have much of a leg to stand on if he signed a work for hire agreement saying he's working for a page rate, you paid him, that was the end of your obligation. But if you want to get somebody for cheaper, you might promise them some back end, percentage. Let's make this a 50-50. I'll still pay you a little bit, as much as I can afford, but you'll also have a percentage of the back end, and then you have a different type of agreement. So really, it depends on you personally and your relationship to the artist, and how much you think they're actually contributing. You want to be fair about everything.
Yeah, and with your contracts, with every contract you make, whether it's this or that, have a job abandonment clause in it. Basically, it says that if a creator never finishes the work, especially if you're collaborating, work for hire, this isn't a big deal, but for a collaboration, if an artist never fulfills what they were supposed to, even in a second issue, have it written out that they are abandoning the project and all the rights go back to whoever created who. So everyone gets the original IPs back in their camp. The reason I say this is if you don't do something like that and don't make it very clear, later on, someone can come back and say, well, I was part of this project, and you're going to screw up everything you worked for after they left because you clearly didn't say, hey, if you just ghost me, then everyone gets it back. But remember, if they created a character when that happened, they keep that character. So if you kept using that character, they will be open to at least get rewarded for that character. You should never use a character without permission. Always ask permission. I've always gone back. I've gotten screwed by plenty of artists, and that doesn't mean that I ever deliberately go after them or try to do anything underhanded. I had an artist who disappeared from a project. He left it, went on, took my idea, made his own series in a different way, but based on the core idea of what I did. But I wanted to reprint the book we'd worked on. I simply went up to him and asked him for permission to continue to print it, just to make sure he knew that I was on the level and I wasn't doing anything behind his back. I then took the idea, some of the ideas from it, and built a new series. So, like Dee said, always talk to people, even if the relationship didn't end well. As long as there's lines of communication, you can still have conversations about it. Might mean, like Darren said, that you had that work for hire, so you don't owe them anything. But you owe them to pick up a phone and let them know, or an email or a messenger. Hey, we got picked up. Just wanted you to hear it from me. Thank you for the work that you did on it. You guys, you can now say that you were part of this as per the work for hire. Reminding them that it was a work for hire, but you're acknowledging that they were part of it.
And that's just being professional, communicating with people in the industry. Like everybody says on all of these episodes all the time, this industry is pretty small. I mean, you don't want to go in and start pushing people around and say, this belongs to me. You don't, you can't, it's my right, and all that bullshit. We're a bunch of people who love comic books. It's not worth getting into fights about.
Oh, you're right. And as far as communication, there's another point I wanted to make is with new artists and new colorists and letterers, I guess, there's something that they have to understand is that everybody gets notes on something. If you're writing a novel and you're Stephen King and you have an editor, you turn it in, you're going to get notes back. Okay. Because the first thing you do generally is shit and it needs work. so that's the truth. If you trust your editor, then you'll respect what they have to say. If you don't agree, maybe you can say that. But the thing I'm trying to say is don't take it personal. It's professionalism is when someone says, I need these 5 tweaks made on this cover, and your response is, okay, no problem. Send me reference or make sure I can, send me a list so I don't miss anything. You never take it personally. Just do it. If you feel like you're getting abused after 2, 3, 4 rounds of corrections, then you need to pull them aside and ask them what's up. Was my work just not good enough? Figure something out. But everybody gets revisions. Don't take it personally. Even if you think you turn in the greatest thing ever, some guys are big enough to just tell you they're not going to do them. Like if you ask Alex Ross to change the lighting on something,
No.
right? Or Michael Bendis, he's not going to change the story. So certain guys don't change what they're doing, but you're not that guy. Okay, you need to collaborate, work, and together, and that's what it's all about. If you're getting that kind of attitude, you're probably not going to get asked to work with that person again, especially if that person is a professional and has done this dozens and dozens of times. They'll remember it was harder when I picked this person. I'm just going to go with somebody easier, and it's nothing personal. They just want it to be on time. So that's my spiel on communication.
To that point, because I know that we have a lot of people who are new in our community, don't get trampled on either. Like Darren said, if they're coming back with sixth round of revisions on the same page, there's a communication problem. It's not the work, it's what's being communicated. So if you feel like something is done well or done according to the communication you've got and you're still getting edits, I would strongly suggest communicating. Stand up for what you think is right. Just don't be a dick about it. There's a way to be professional, even when you are, Neil Gaiman. Like if somebody says, shouldn't that shadow be on the other side? And you can't explain why, maybe the shadow should be on that side. Like give the critique thought and return with a professional conversation.
Well, there is one exception to all that.
Right.
And I used to work in custom comics, and custom comics is when we're creating a story for a client. So let's say I wrote an M&M story and I'm giving it to an artist, and that means I have to send it to the company, M&M Mars, and they have their creative director looking at it. So if he's telling you that the red M&M, his gloves don't look like that, or the eyes are wrong on the blue M&M, then the eyes are wrong. Even if you think they're right,
Right.
you need to revise them. The client is going to drive. In my case, the client sometimes drove our artists crazy. So what we had to do is file a request for something called combat pay, which essentially means that we're kind of jerking them around. So we're going to give them another page. We're going to pay them for another page, even though they're not doing another page. You're just doing so many corrections. It's a pain in the butt. So we would put in for combat pay because of Lexus or M&M's or Ford or whatever it is. So understand, if you're doing custom work and you're working with a client, that it's not the editor necessarily giving you all those notes. A lot of it's coming to him from the client, and that's something that you have to understand. And it's part of being professional as well. Custom work is a little tougher, and you don't get to be as artsy with it. You got to just do if it's like drawing a Simpsons comic. They got to look like the Simpsons. You can't do it in your style, okay? You don't have a style. Here's your style right here. Yeah. So
after working in advertising, I love the fact that you call that combat pay. I wish I could have gotten combat pay for when I was on a 12th revision for a 6-second social short. Like, oh my God, that would have been fantastic.
I can't take credit for that. I think Ricky Purdon came up with that. Yeah. But it's something that I could relate to because I used to, get danger pay for my job in the Army. So I totally understand.
Awesome. Okay. One other thing that there are tons of videos on and that people should at least bullet point at the bottom of their comic book plan is marketing. Branding and marketing your comic is a whole huge bucket of information that we're not going to cover tonight, but it's something that you should definitely discuss with your team and put an action plan together about how you're going to deal with it. Because in this new digital world where you get maybe 6 seconds of people's attention, you need to get eyes on things. And so that's something you need to think about going into making your comic. Maybe you don't need to know ahead of time, but you kind of need to have an idea of how you're going to put that stuff out. So the last thing that I wanted to talk was pitfalls, but I think a lot of what we talked about during the whole episode was pitfalls. Were there any major pitfalls that you guys feel most people forget or don't plan for that really leave them in the lurch at the end?
I would just say that the planning part is what is a major pitfall, because if like we were saying, pretty much the whole time here, if you don't know where you're going with your characters and the story, you're done, because it's just going to die out.
Yeah, you're right. As far as writing and creating, there's a ton creative wise, in just plain production outside of the creative. A couple of pitfalls is one, when you think you're done, you're not. How many times have you labeled a file final only to have to go back and label it again? And it's you have to double check the credits, the indicia, basically Marvel has a whole team of proofreaders. you should at least have your mom read it or somebody read the thing before you send it to the printer, because inevitably the first page you flip to, you're going to see a typo. And if you're not careful about that. So just be professional, send it to one of your educated friends to take a quick look at and make sure that you didn't make any dumb errors. The other one is in dealing with the printer. If this is a printed book, there's nothing that delays a book more than these files are formatted wrong, or this link is broken, or I don't have this font, or this isn't working. Make sure that you find somebody who knows what they're doing in the post-production to put your book together. A lot of times it's the letterer, because that's what they do. Ask the letterer, can you do the post-production and put the book together for me? If you don't know how to do it yourself. And the letterer could be that resource for you. But getting a printer telling you the files don't work, every time you get that call, it could cost you a day. And sometimes when you're dealing with Diamond, one day could end up costing you a week, so it's something to keep in mind.
Cool.
All right. Are you ready, Dee, for me to take over?
Yes.
Well, I want to talk
green
about,
now.
well, this is Backer Pause. Backer Pause is back tomorrow. But what Darren was saying, for those who need help, Comics Impressions right here in Cape Coral, I know Dee worked with them,
Yes.
actually has a very informed gentleman who's in charge of it. Great staff, always answering questions. His name is Rich. Reach out to him. He'll be happy to help you with format and all that. So definitely a great person. That's why I went to Backer Pause, because we always show his stuff.
Oh, got
This
it.
is the same.
Why did we suddenly change color?
No, right. This is a studio that we share with different programs. A couple
Yeah.
of things we did want to talk about today was to get to the message boards, because we've been talking about what you guys want. Here's the actual live message board right now on comicbookschool.com. Now, one of the things that we're Buddy's been talking about is making a help wanted section to actually help creators connect within the Comic Book School network and on the forums, which is a great way for you guys to reach out. This is something that will be coming to you. But we need you to make noise. We need you to get active. We want to show this, the Comic Book School forums are working. So we need you to put what your expectations of the community are, all the information that you can give us, and all the amazing feedback that you have at the fingertips. Next week, we're planning to actually talk about that. And right now, there's only 4 or 5 people who made comments, and we'll be talking about my Kickstarter instead, which I'm happy to do, by the way, because my Kickstarter is starting next week. Hey, look at that. This is going to have a coloring book cover. We could do a whole show just about Cat Dad and Supermom next week, and I'm happy to do it. I'm sure Buddy wouldn't be happy, but hey, I have the keys to the StreamYard right now. So instead of doing that, go to our forums and let us know what you guys want. Be part of this. You guys can see there's a lot going on in here, so be part of the conversation. Now, Dee, you want me to do the comments, the questions, and the concerns in the community board now?
Yeah, I mean, the forum, to your point, is a great place. If you have questions about this episode, if you have questions about planning, production, post-production, all the different things, how we do it at Comic Book School, we can always reach out to Darren and ask him if he has, different comments that he hasn't shared with us yet today. And then Mike, I know he's not usually on the boards, but we can find him if we need to. But everybody at Comic Book School is happy to share their information, and the boards are a great place to go to get it. So that's my 2 cents. Rob, you can take it away.
And here, look, it's a coloring book cover. It's actually going to be oh, you meant something different. Oh, I'm sorry. All right, Buddy's in the room. Some of my favorite people are on tonight. Mike just starts writing, which is a great thing as a writer. Just start writing. That is the job of a writer, right?
You got to have that plan, though, because I have many things that are just dead in my computer.
Sup, everyone. Sup, Roy. Philip says, just means they haven't found their limit yet. He's talking about the artists when they say that they don't know what they're not good at. But that's a dangerous thing, Philip. You're paying them to learn their mistakes. As the person in charge, you're now paying them to learn on your dime. This is very important. And this is one thing that creators never ask. It's not impolite to ask someone how long they've been doing something. It's not like a woman's age where you're not supposed to ask it. So this you can ask. This isn't someone's weight. This is, hey, how many books have you done and who could I ask? And who are your references?
To that point, if you are looking for an artist, okay, or if you're an artist and looking for a writer, et cetera, ask for examples of what they've done. Okay. Because I knew a guy who saw a couple of pictures from somebody and they thought they were excellent. They thought they were the best damn artist they'd ever seen. And they did a comic book with them. And that man didn't know how to draw hands. So
Yep.
every single panel, the hands were behind a building, in the pockets, behind their back, like the most
Like the
awkward
opposite of Rye Blufffield.
It was awful. He didn't know how to draw hands and he didn't know how to draw feet. So every panel was cut off at the knees or cut off. Like, look for the details. If you're going to draw something with dinosaurs, get a guy that draws dinosaurs. If you're going to draw farm animals, get a girl that draws farm animals. If you're going to draw aliens from a different planet, get the person that you know does the style you want. They might be a little bit more expensive, but it's worth it so that they don't have T-Rex hands in your pockets.
And there's a difference here between someone showing you a splash page and how wonderful that splash page looks and sequence art. If you're making a comic book, always ask to see what they've done with sequential art and ask to see the script or lettered part of it. Don't just see a blank page because you might not understand it. Honestly, if I'm ever looking at artists, I ask for a couple pages in a row to see what they've done. I've been given PDFs, and like Aaron says, you can start seeing the mistakes. And when you've done this for a long enough period, you suddenly wonder, why is this guy's hands in his pocket? Is this about a pervert? Is this a concerning project? And then all of a sudden you realize the guy just can't draw hands. And no, we're not making fun of Rob Liefeld. I know that everyone heard feet and thought we were talking about him. We're not picking on anyone. It's just the truth, because there are people. I know this. I've told artists I want this, and that, and they give me something completely different. And like, but this isn't what I asked for. I asked for the other thing. I didn't really feel comfortable drawing that. Why didn't you just tell me that? I could have given you a different idea, and we could have tried to change it up. So again, communication.
That's being communication, being professional in your communication also.
Yep.
I want to chime in with a quick story on that.
Okay.
A lot of artists have learned to work around their weaknesses. I know I did a signing at I think it was in Dallas at one of our conventions, and I was sitting with Jim Lee as he was signing books for people. He was doing like little 1 minute, 30-second sketches kind of things, and he was taking requests, and he had a big line. It was really impressive. He was knocking them out, from Ant-Man to Batman to Robin to whatever the person said. And the one thing that tripped him up was when a kid came up and asked him to draw Crypto, and he said, "Oh, I suck at dogs, man." And that's Jim Lee. So he did Crypto, and it wasn't great. And he said, it's not great. I'm sorry. And he signed it. But they know what they're good at and what they're bad at. So sometimes if somebody's really good at something, like let's say like George Perez was good at crowd shots. Or somebody might be really good at action or really good at drawing motorcycles or helicopters or whatever it is. If you know that as a writer, you might be able to use that. I've seen scripts that call for, and a 4-page fight happens here. And then you start writing the 5th page, 'cause basically you just leave it up to the artist to do a nice, throwdown fight in the middle of Manhattan between Hulk and Thing, and then, you pick it up down the road. Because he's going to do something better than what you're going to come up with. And once you see the pencils, you add in a couple of lines. But sometimes you trust your artist to enhance what you have in your head. And if you communicate, you'll know what they're not good at. Some guys can't draw a pretty girl to save their life. Some guys can't draw cars, whatever it is. If it'll help you down the road. Doesn't mean don't use them. It just means understand what they can and can't do.
Good points. Philip goes on to ask us, if there's one thing we've learned from the digital era, it's the communication is dramatically more challenging endeavor than once believed. And that's so true. We have more ways to connect with each other so quickly, and we never actually spend the time to communicate properly. It's okay to ask, hey, do you know what I'm talking about? Hey, do you understand what I'm saying? That follow-up question is magical, because someone might be like, well, what did you mean by this? Because when you give permission to ask a question, someone feels they can approach it.
I think we might need to do a whole episode just on what it is to be professional in this industry too, because I've had a lot of people with sort of mixed expectations about what it is to communicate. For me, if you send me an email, I should have 24 to 48 hours to get back to you. unless it's something we're like actively monitoring. And I think a lot of people will get on chats or Instagram or social platforms. I've been reached out to on multiple social platforms that I don't check very often. And they're like, you didn't get back to me. And I'm like, this message is from 2 years ago. I don't even use this platform anymore. So like, it's very good, especially if you're working with someone, especially if you have timeline, deadlines, whatever, hit your deadlines, hit your timelines, but know that your communications and what your expectations of those communication channels are, because I've reached out to people through text and calls that are like, I don't answer the phone. I don't talk on the phone. And I'm like, okay, well, that's abnormal for me, but let's talk about what the best way is to communicate with you then, because if I'm calling and they never answer and I expect a call, we're not getting through. So that's something to recognize.
And Doobie Brother asks us, how do I get into drawing comics? I'm a lifelong comic reader and traditional visual artist and painter. That's an entire 60-minute episode, to be honest. But here is the 2-second answer that we have time for, because we're at the end of our show and we have to hit our 1-hour mark. Join comicbookschool.com's forum boards today and start this very topic right now and hear from the community. That's what it's about. Get everyone involved. Let them give you their experiences and connect with a community that will help you rise up. And Buddy Scalera says, why did I never get that combat pay? Buddy, and to that,
you don't have to answer that, Darren. You don't have to answer that.
Yeah.
All I have to say to Buddy is you get paid. I'll have the indie answer in the room. Wait, you're getting money for doing comics? And Doobie Brother said, I signed up for him just now. I will. So he's going to take that conversation to the forum boards where it's going to happen, and we're going to have all the information for you guys. And that's it for the show. I'm going to let everyone go around the room and say their goodbyes. Starting with Darren, I guess. Let's. Where can they follow you, Darren?
Oh, wow. Honestly, I don't remember my own Instagram because I had to change it recently. So it's I think it's FDSanch11 at Instagram. That's where they can find me.
Mike, you're up on the board.
Yep. Instagram and Twitter. Mike Fasolo 1987. That's about it. Not very exciting.
And Dee gets the famous Buddy Scalera final thought. I'm going to put everyone in the back room. She gets to sign us off, and apparently I'm being called by the little boss, and he's yelling. So, I'll be back. Go ahead, Dee.
So final thoughts are planning is essential. I've been told throughout my life, at school, on the job, and in all of my art classes, artwork, anything, failure to plan is planning to fail. It's something that I kind of hold on to because I can not only judge my progress based on planning, but I also feel like I get a lot more done, not just because I have a checklist, but because I think everybody understands where we're going and where we've been. It's your roadmap to making whatever creative endeavor you want. I strongly think that even if you don't follow your plan to a T, or even if it falls apart midway through, at least you can account for where you've been. At Comic Book School, we teach not only the creation and production of making comics, but also the business of making comics. So if you have questions about planning, about making comics, about breaking into comics, come join us at comicbookschool.com and create.comicbookschool.com, which is our forums. I'm sorry, I have dogs, but I hope you guys have a great week, and come see us next week for our first community meeting of the year, where we'll be answering all of your questions. Rob, I'm going to let you go back because I don't have commands in this window.
We'll see everyone next Tuesday for another exciting edition of Comic Book School. We would thank our guests and our temporary co-hosts this week, and Dee for taking the top chair this week and being our leader. We'll see everyone next week. Say goodbye, Dee.
Bye.